Hello, welcome to another episode of Enlightning. We already have some friends in the chat saying hi. Hello to Nick, the first one. I love Nick, the first one, when you're the first one in the chat. Like it's just too perfect, you know? And then Solid Boy's back. Hello, welcome. We're here today with our guest, Waciuma Wanjohi. It's so glad you're here, Waciuma. Will you please unmute yourself and introduce yourself to us?
Hey, my name is
Hi.
Waciuma. I am a software engineer at VMware, and I'm one of the maintainers of Cartographer. And I'm really happy to be here to talk about why the project's so cool.
I'm so excited for that too. And one reason I'm really excited to have you as a guest is because I know you're a career changer like myself. You started in a different career, and your past career was education. So I'm interested in how that's going to translate today to your presentation. And also, I'm interested to know like what subjects you taught. But before I do, we have a lot more. Hello, Abhishek's here. Abhishek, you're in Twitch today instead of YouTube. And then, hi, it's good to see you again this week. I'm so glad you're here. We have, hello, developer guy is here. I'm not sure what that means, but I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for coming. And we have, what is a cartographer? We're going to get right off the bat. And I'm trying to, and Nick, the first one's acknowledging. I try to keep my names meaning. So I guess okay, we're definitely going to answer your question, friends, but I want to dig in a little bit on like who Waciuma is and why we're excited to have him here before we jump right in to the technology talk. So tell me about your education career, please, Waciuma.
Yeah, I started as a New York City teaching fellow a long time ago, the early aughts. And I taught students from Harlem for over half a decade. And
what age were your students?
So I've been a classroom teacher for students from 3 to 18 in various roles.
Nice.
But the majority of my career was third grade, which
okay.
I think is just a super sweet spot. You know, kids are, I would say the thing that I really love about third grade is that students are making that transition from learning to read to reading to learn, which is
cool.
Something you'll hear in teachers talk about. And, you know, it's just eventually all of us like make that snap where we're just like, wait, you mean I could figure out anything in the world from like all these books? It's like the first time you had that realization, you are just like ready to go. And so I was that third grade.
And I remember my third grade teacher, and I loved her. Like I was like, that's still an age with kids where you're like, the kids really want to please their teachers, and the teachers are like wonderful people, as opposed to like when they're shooting spitballs at you, you know?
Yeah, definitely. You know, third grade is still at that developmental age where your most important relationships are child to adult. Like you still need to know. Like there's so much about the world that you don't know how it works, and you're like, oh, adults are gonna teach me that. And you know, later elementary and middle school, you developmentally shift to I need to figure out my relationships with peers and like how I'm going to like fit into society. And
I never did figure it out.
Wow. I don't suggest going back to middle school to try to.
It's a hard time. So what? I want to say hello to Suman. Hello, thanks for coming. What takeaways, like what teaching strategies can you use with third graders that also translate to teaching a more complex technology like Cartographer? Or learning, not necessarily teaching, maybe learning. How did it shape how you go about learning information?
Learning information. I mean, I'm not sure. I think that you know the big thing was that I got into software engineering because I went to a conference and they presented Scratch, and I was like, I bet my students could do that. And it remains to be seen. Some of those students are going to start hitting college. It remains to be seen if I inspired a lifelong interest in software engineering in them, but I definitely inspired it in me.
Nice. My son is a college graduate. He's a developer at Adobe, but it actually went the other way around, where he got me into tech instead of vice versa. So, so again, like the kids inspiring the adults. So I would love to hear. I'm going to start transitioning to getting behind the light board so we can answer what is a cartographer, which actually it's fun to answer like as a profession. What's a cartographer as a person, and how does that translate to the technology? But in doing so I would like to hear a lot more about your journey from teacher to software developer. I know that we talked a little bit about it offline, and I think it's a really valuable resource that you learned through. And will you please talk more about that?
Yeah.
I'm also, while you do that, I'm going to throw some links in the chat too. All right.
Yeah, that's great. So when I decided that I wanted to try out this software thing, I was looking online for resources, and I came across Open Source Society University, and it was a project to say, you may be the sort of person who, there were a lot of boot camps out there that were like, you could throw tens of thousands of dollars at this, and we will train you to get job ready. And OSSU was like, well, what if you did everything for free, and it wasn't specifically to get you job ready? It was, let's approximate as closely as possible what you would learn in an academic computer science undergraduate degree. And that really appealed to me. And so I started following that curriculum. And since then, it worked. I can make something. It's like really useful to all the folks that are here. And so
when did this happen for you? How long ago? How long have you been a software?
I started at Pivotal Software 3.5 years ago.
Okay, so nice.
Not terribly long ago.
Yeah,
it's very, very strange. I feel very old, and in my career, very young. So
I can relate.
Keep yourself young. Just keep changing.
I can totally relate to that.
So yeah, after finding success personally, I wanted to give back to that community, and I've gotten more involved in both the curriculum writing. The folks that had started it came from a CS background, but didn't have any pedagogical background, and so I came in and I was like, well, we should choose courses not just based on like, I liked this course, but actually look for what is an undergraduate degree in computer science. And so we identified standards that are created by the ACM and the IEEE, which are professional organizations for computer scientists and professionals in engineering and CS. And we created an RFC process so that we could more easily discuss and also get great ideas from other people. And in addition, we've been able to start other curricula. So, for example, we have a math curricula that right now, I will totally admit, is like very. I once heard somebody describe it as a math undergraduate degree if you asked an engineer to write one. It's very applied, and there's just like all this crazy great math stuff that like a lot of the folks that started writing the curriculum didn't know about. And it's an open source project, so we continue to get contributions, and we continue to solicit people who like really geek out on those topics to contribute, to tell us, here's what's lacking, and oh, this is like an insanely great resource that you should check out to put in front of students.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's low or no cost too, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, so that is our goal. And we have discussions about, what are the criteria for listing a course. And to be clear, we're not creating courses. We are curating a list so that, when I started, I was not at the point where I would have been prepared to say like, oh, these are the courses that I need. And so we're filling that gap. And we're looking for things that are high quality, that are free to use, and at best, courses that offer feedback, because of course, pedagogically, getting feedback on your success is a huge piece of succeeding and learning.
And like the approaching any new subject, the hardest blocker at first is just knowing what you don't know. So it sounds like this is an amazing resource to like help you know what you don't know and curate a path for you. And I say hello to Fuel Snable. I'm so glad you're here. Good to see you, friends. I'm going to be in Copenhagen soon. Let's hang out. Are you ready to talk about what is a cartographer as a person, like as a profession? It's a map maker, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You can see our logo is it looks like city streets, because the cartographer is somebody who maps the world.
Yeah, cool.
And then the project, the funny way we say it, it is mapping something specific. It's mapping your path from code to production.
Okay. Nice.
So yeah, what does Cartographer do? Cartographer helps you take Kate's resources that you would use to build and assure your code is good to go to customers, and it connects all of those, and it gives you this API layer where you can say, okay, I want it to go first to this resource, then this resource, then this resource, then this. And that is something that previous systems have done. Lots of people may have heard of an orchestrator that is meant to do CI/CD. And one of the differences that Cartographer is targeting is not only are we taking a slightly more expansive view of what CI/CD is, so not just testing, but also thinking through like steps like manual review. And in addition, we're saying, well, the primitives for most CI/CD systems up until now have been bash CLIs or image executables. And the world is, we're here to talk about Kate's. The world is moving towards delivering software as Kubernetes resources, as custom resources. And so Cartographer allows you to work with those custom resources as a primitive.
Okay.
Everybody, we're
dig in on a lot of that. I want to say hi to Joy. Hello, Joy. I also just want to make a quick distinction that when you say Kate's, you mean Kubernetes. So that's Kate is a short way to say that. Yeah, no big deal. And then I'm trying to kind of think about like a way to start, or do you know what I would love with people in chat who have experience with CI/CD? What kind of tooling are you using, and what's been your experience with it? So that's one question that I would love to get feedback from our audience on. And then maybe it might be good to talk about choreography versus orchestration as a starting point. How does that sound to you, based on what you just said?
Yeah. So as I said, one of the things about orchestration is, you have this idea of like you kick off a run, and you say, you have a system where generally you're just writing like every piece of that system, often in Bash. And so as I said, I started Pivotal Software. I used a tool called Concourse quite extensively when we were assuring our, hey, I see somebody in the chat. Also, the moment I said Concourse, they said Concourse too. It's great. And I would be writing both like the high level, like I want things to move from step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, as well as I would have to define like really carefully like all the imperative steps in step 1 and all the imperative steps in all the imperative actions that would happen in step 2. And
so can we go one level up and be like, what is orchestration? That's when you have one central tool telling each thing what to do, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then it's doing that partly with imperative steps. But will you help me say that in a nicer way? Or maybe just one central tool would be one thing to list under orchestration?
Yeah. So it was like one system to declare to write it all.
Okay.
You essentially write a system where everything that happens, you've specified it all, and you've and in addition, when things happen, they run from beginning to end, all the way through once, and then you kick it off again, and it runs all the way through again.
One system you specified, and then runs all the way through each time.
Yes.
Cool. And then we have some comments in the chat. Nick, the first one says, up until now, my CI/CD skills are just a bunch of PowerShell bash scripts that are running things. And that, I think that's part of the problem that Cartographer is trying to solve, is it not? That will.
Yeah. And
Abhishek is a +1 to that comment.
And I would just say, like, I don't know that I don't know that it gets like when you say are just a bunch of, it's like it often doesn't. You get more sophisticated at it, you get better at it, but you're like you're just always writing a whole bunch of bash scripts and linking them together. And so, yeah, then we get to choreography, where we say, what if we could take some of these steps and isolate them, and in the same way that we think of having a monorepo, that so when we think about our applications, and this is something that if you are a developer, you've probably heard about microservices. The whole idea is, instead of trying to build a system like Spotify or Twitter as like just one big program where it all runs all together, you say, what if you could take each individual piece and break it out so that it's its own isolated program, and the other pieces of the program interact with it through some message broker. And so you could say, I'm going to build a website that's going to allow people to shop, and you might say, like, oh, the part of the app that allows you to browse the shop, and the part of the app that allows you to like check out and put in your credit card information and actually make purchases, those are just separate programs. There are separate teams working on them, and when somebody's in that browsing app and says, like, oh, I'd like to add this to my shopping cart, a message is sent from that to some broker, and then that broker, it says, like, oh, okay, I'm going to broadcast this message to the host of applications, and one of those applications is going to like light up and say, like, oh, hey, that's important for me to know. I'm going to grab it and I'm going to do what I need to do with it.
Yeah.
And so
and we
you can
talked a lot about this in the past episode. What is Knative eventing? We went through a lot of that. So if people aren't familiar with that concept, maybe revisit that. Okay,
yeah.
so we have a broker for messaging, and how does that relate to this?
So this is bringing that same sort of architecture to CI/CD, where we say instead of having all these bash scripts that you've written that are this one run through, this mono CI/CD, you instead have individual pieces that are responsible for specific parts of your journey to production. And when they run, they pop messages out to a message broker. That broker is Cartographer, and Cartographer is responsible for saying, "Hey, I've got a new message. I'm going to propagate this to any other step, any other entity in this path to production that needs this information." And so each of those steps, gets information, processes, and puts that information back out into the world. And one of the nice things about, well, go ahead.
Will you help me capture some of that here? So you're calling this orchestration a mono system, and so it's more tightly coupled, is what kind of what you're saying about that. And also, Nick has a good question right now too. We're just assuming right now that y'all know what orchestration tools are. What are some examples of So Nick was saying, I'm trying to understand what tools you have in mind when you're talking about orchestration. So that they're just saying they're not a native speaker. So I think thank you so much for bringing that up, Nick. And
yeah, the tool that I always think about are cloud native build packs. And so folks in the chat are probably aware that you can take code and turn that code into an image, and that can make it easier to deploy that code on servers across the world. When you are taking your code and turning it into an image, you could use a Docker file, and there's some complication there. Cloud native build packs are a tool that says like, oh, don't write a Docker file. Like, we've got a program that can analyze your code and it can create the image for you. One implementation of that comes from Pack, and so Pack will do exactly what I just said: analyze your code and create it in the world. And you can use Pack as a CLI. Alternatively, you can use Kpack, and Kpack is the Kubernetes controller for that. And with so those are two tools that I often think of, where we've got
where Pack is like an orchestration version and Kpack is a choreography version that does the same thing. Okay, interesting. I was and maybe I was wrong here, but I was thinking orchestration tools would be more like Jenkins or Tecton.
Yes. Sorry. I was thinking the tools that you would use inside, like once you have grabbed an orchestrator and you say you're going to do some orchestration, or once you've grabbed a choreographer and you say you're going to do some choreography. So yes.
Got it.
Your Jenkins, your Concourse, your Tecton, those are all examples of orchestration systems.
And then Jenkins or Concourse or Tecton might use the Pack CLI as part of a custom bash script that's written as part of this running its system in its entirety, this mono system. Okay.
Yeah.
And then if you're using choreography, you would use Kpack, which is with Cloud Native Build Packs, a cloud native way to work with Cloud Native Build Packs. I guess it's called Cloud Native Build Packs. So of course it's Cloud Native. And then Suman's saying that they guess choreography requires more measured control over orchestration. Do you think that's accurate?
I would actually flip that. And I guess there'd be a question about what do we mean by measured control? But I would say that in the same way that going from a mono repo in applications to microservices, I would say that that's less control because you're able to develop in a more decoupled way. And what's really important is to have that API for communication between all the various pieces. In the same way, in choreography, there's that API for communication that Cartographer is smoothing out for individuals. But then each piece is free to be developed and to operate independently.
So the API is for communication between your steps.
Yeah.
Your CI/CD steps.
Yeah, exactly. Because right now, the thing that Cartographer is filling is that those tools. If you are writing, if you're writing a large application as a set of microservices, like you're going to sit down and you're going to have conversations about like, what's the API going to be here? How's this communication going to happen? But across the internet, it turns out that's not happening between the wide variety of super useful Kubernetes resources. Those tools are not necessarily sitting down with all the other open source tools saying like, how are we going to make it possible to super tightly integrate here? And so Cartographer comes in and says, and we provide a way to for you as the user to say, okay, here is the way that to get a useful message out of this tool, and then similarly, here's the way to get useful message into this tool.
Okay. And so do you think I've captured choreography here compared to orchestration in these 3 points, declarative steps, more decoupled steps, and then an API for communication between the steps?
Yeah, that sounds good. Yes.
Cool. And we do have a question from Babusa. API I did not. My interface just went a little weird. Okay, there we go. API communication, is that like using gRPC? I don't actually know what that technology is.
It's a communication protocol. Another is REST.
Okay.
So
okay, I'm familiar with that. Cool.
Yeah, like most communication that's happening, gRPC is mostly. Actually, I welcome the chat to correct me. gRPC I would think of for communication internal to an application, whereas REST communication happens all over the internet, and that's the post-patch, those HTTP verbs that folks are likely familiar with. And so when we talk about the API, really, you and I could create an API today by just saying, hey, Whitney, when I say foo, you say bar. Foo,
bar.
Hey, there we go. So we just created a contract for communication right there, and we can continue to add and make it much more useful than our current API for communication. But yeah, when I talk about an API, it is really talking about what is the contract for communication for getting useful work done.
That's great. And so what I would love, if you feel like it's time I would love to go over a concrete example of like what even are the steps? Like, so we're trying to get, let's say we're trying to get our code and we want our code to run in production. What even are those steps? And then how does Choreographer work with those steps? Does that? Yeah. So to me, the next question is how do you even get code to production? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I was step back to first principles. It's like, okay, I just wrote some code. It's on my machine. And I've got some goals. I want people to pay me. And in order to get people to pay me, I want, I need something that's like quality. And so in order to assure that one, I can get the code, I can make the code available to them, I'm going to need to make an image, and I'm going to need to put that image on the server. And I'm going to want to do some testing. So the first thing I want to do after I write my code is to just run a bunch of tests on my code. Most people will have written tests. It's good to write tests. You should write tests. After I test my code, I run all the tests to make sure that it'll pass.
And you're testing it locally on your laptop?
So I'll do both. When I'm developing, I will, I'll write tests. I'll write code that makes the test pass, and then I'll make a commit and I'll push that code to some source control, Git push, for example. But then after I do that, I also want some automated machine to pick up the changes that I made and run all the tests again. Because I may have goofed and I may have just run a subset of the tests when I was doing all of that and just didn't notice, like, oh wait, if I run the whole test suite, something does fail. I don't want my code quality to depend on, on me never making a slip like that. I want to put in automation that's a backstop to that.
Okay. Do you want me to capture the developer testing, or is this part of the automated steps for production? Like, we're starting with code on the laptop and then automated tests that also run locally would be the next part in an automated path? Yeah.
So that code on laptop, test on laptop, and push from laptop to source control to get push. I think we should exclude. I would say let's exclude that. And that's what I'm talking about. That first step of code from code to production. It's like once you've gotten all that code up into the cloud, up into GitHub.
First step is pushing, we'll say, to GitHub, but the source control.
Yeah. And I should say that there's at least one system that's being built on top of Cartographer that is to help that local development cycle. So that's possible, but we're going to stick with a simple use case for today.
Yes, let's keep it simple. So we're going to push to GitHub, and that's what's going to be our first step in getting our code to production, assuming we've coded and tested locally already.
Yeah.
Great.
So now the code has been pushed. I want some automated system that's just going to run all the tests.
So automated tests. Do I need to write that? That's a step.
Yeah, that's one of the steps.
Okay. I'm not going to put automated because the whole point is everything's automated, right? Automated.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put tests. Yeah, okay. Cool. Go on, please.
Okay, so I run my test now. I want to create an image that will allow me to put that image on a server somewhere. So build an image.
Build. I like build better than create. Okay.
After building the image, I want to do an image scan. Here I'm checking for, the image kind of inherently has other stuff that's not my code. I've likely used some base image to create that code, and I could have used Ubuntu 2014 or something. It could be like super out of date and like super insecure. So I want to run some scan to make sure that no known vulnerabilities exist inside the image. And then after I build the image, after I scan the image, I'll put it on a server.
Okay.
So I'm going
like
to
that's where you
it.
actually you run it. Okay, deploy the image.
Yeah, deploy the image, run the image. Yeah.
Okay. Excellent.
So yeah, so that's
that's it. It's running. It's ready for traffic.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, the more serious you are, if you are writing, the next communication platform that's going to replace Twitter, and like you're in early days, this could be your path to production. If you are running a system that's going to control a power plant for the Central Tennessee Valley, you may have some more steps to in there. We're going to stay with a simple example today.
Yes, I love simple examples. Cool. Great. So now I'm an ops person, I suppose, right? And then I want to make, because the person setting up the choreography or the orchestration, any of it, is going to be the ops person in a business. Is that correct?
Yeah. And so you may either be, you may have a DevOps role where your responsibility is both to write the code and to get it into production and to monitor it once it's in production.
And your Twitter replacement startup, you got to do it all, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Keep your organization nimble.
Yeah.
And I'll say, I come from a DevOps background, so in part I'm like, yeah, in all of these roles, you want to empower people to, the people writing it should be able to get the feedback from end users. Like they should be able to see what's happening in production, what are the problems, because then they go back and code those. So I like that type feedback loop, but not every organization is like that, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So those, so you could similarly have, let's say you're a bank and there are regulations to say, the developers and the operators should be separate teams, can keep each other honest. So yes, in that case, the operators are folks that just take whatever code is handed to them and do those short steps to deploy the code.
And we have some great questions. Babusa says, what are the tools used in each steps? And then also similarly, it looks like we're designing a pipeline right now.
Yeah, quite so. Pipeline, of course, is a term that comes from that orchestration world. And so I've certainly done in Concourse, I've written Concourse pipelines. And so primitives are called pipelines. A pipeline
by nature is very linear, right? It's one and then the other.
Yeah, quite so. And so today what we're going to do is talk about how you create a cartographer supply chain. And so you can tell that there are similar ideas. You're trying to get from A to B, and you're trying to deliver what's at the front of the pipeline to the end of the pipeline. What's the beginning of the supply chain to the end of the supply chain. And we're going to choose tools that, as we said, have a declarative interface and that are able to run independently in some important ways.
Okay, I like that. Choose tools. So we want them to have a declarative interface. And that's where we talk about like what you mentioned before, like pack CLI versus KPack in terms of how you might build an image. Okay. And they can run independently. Is that what's the second thing?
Yeah, they're one of the great things about Kubernetes controllers is they're just always spinning and they're always checking to see So yeah, so I can dig deeper into that, but yeah.
So will we answer Babusa's questions about what tools are used in each step as we design our pipeline?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so we will be answering that question. You're just very smartly jumping the gun a little bit, asking great questions. And then we have from, oh, look at this. It would be very nice if we had code, actual hands-on steps with today's Enlightning. I have to, it's in my email. I have a demo. Do you have a demo handy? How can
Yes.
after the show, I can tweet for y'all the link to a demo that my coworker recorded. That's like 14 minutes, so you can see it. Or if you have one handy, Waciuma, that you can, if you send it to me in our interfaces private chat, I can put it in the chat right now. But I think that's a great point, Nick. Some actual hands-on steps with today. Here we go. All right.
So today, we're whiteboarding, and so I don't know about everybody else. I don't like programming with pen and paper.
Yeah.
You can see one thing that we recently did. Another maintainer on the Cartographer project and we're both maintainers on the project, and we did TGIK. Thank goodness it's Kubernetes, which is a weekly Friday program about Kubernetes ecosystem. And there you can see me like actually, showing all the YAML files and applying them and like taking code through a supply chain. As well, in the Cartographer documentation, if you go to cartographer.sh, you can find a section called tutorials, and they really walk you through like sort of step by step, like let's build up from like really, really simple. The first supply chain is literally just one step.
Nice.
So that
and that's what we linked to just now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you can just like dig into all the little pieces. So yeah, and then I think today, and Whitney, you are in control, so we can dive as deep as you'd like. I think today we're going to stay at a little bit higher level and not get into let's write the YAML to create a real supply chain.
I'm not gifted enough to like get the YAML spacing just right and dry erase marker. My YAMLs will run.
Your already your chalkboard looks neater than mine.
Awesome. So great. So let's talk about these. What, I guess I'll let you lead. Like, what's the next step now? We know we're choosing to do a choreography over orchestration. We know what our steps we want to be. We know the types of tools we need to choose that are going to lend themselves to choreography. And now what's the next step?
Yeah. So as we said, you could create a pipeline that's doing all of these things, but instead we're going to look for some Kubernetes controllers that handle these sorts of steps.
Okay.
So the first step, and it's kind of in some ways a little bit of a hidden step, is that
excuse me.
We might even want to change that first step that you have there. It says push to source control. Let's actually turn that from, let's pull from source control instead of push to, because now we're in the mode of somebody's put some code in up in GitHub, and we want to pull it into our cluster so it's easy to work with. The tool that all of our examples work with is the source controller from FlexCD. So FlexCD is an open source project. I believe it is part of the CNCF landscape. And yeah, it's a great tool for doing just that. It will find when you declare a source control object, you tell it, hey, here is the repository I want you to watch. Here's the branch I want you to watch. And it's just going to keep, it will continually spin. And this is, to take a quick step back, what's great about Kubernetes controllers? It's that you write some declarative text, and then they're continually spinning. And they're saying, hey, there's some configuration that I'm going to get from the object declaration that you've given me, but also I'm bringing some knowledge of the outside world, some special factor that like isn't eminently knowable. You know, that's the code that's written into that project. So FlexCD is saying, I know Git, and I'm just constantly going to be polling the outside world, and when there's a change to that outside world state, I'm going to reflect that in my object. And that's a pattern that we'll see in all the tools that we use, or in most of the tools that we use, I should say, that they're constantly going to be combining their the declared configuration with some internal knowledge. Often that internal knowledge is knowledge of the outside world.
Do you think control loop and pulling the outside world, and then there's maybe should be a third point that has something to do with how they're integrating that, how a controller is integrating that knowledge within the cluster?
So control loop, definitely. And
yeah.
I'm glad that you put that there. Yeah, the idea of K8s comes from that engineering idea of observe world, observe self. Am I the way I'm supposed to be? If not, move closer to that. Observe world.
Yeah.
Observe, you know, that loop.
An actual state and a desired state, and bringing them together. Yes, that's Kubernetes in a nutshell.
So yeah, and I should be clear that not every K8s controller is polling the outside world, but many are, and I see that as like those are controllers that I think of like super powered. They're great.
So really, the control loop is, if we're just talking about K8s specifically, and then we're choosing ones for our pipeline that might pull the outside world. So really, the control loop part is what is the important part. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I might need to reposition that. But so what I'm understanding is we have this pull from source control step, and we want to use FluxCD, and we're using cloud native tools. So we need to make a FluxCD resource that lives on our cluster that's going to be a control loop that pulls from source control. Is that correct? That's watching source control, and if there's a change, then it's going to take action. So right now, so that's what that box is. This is a FluxCD resource on our Kubernetes cluster. Cool.
Yeah.
Great.
The next step is going to be running your tests, and for that, I always use Tekton. Tekton's great for testing.
Okay.
After running my tests, we're going to build an image, and we've already mentioned, what's the great tool for that? KPack.
KPack. I did a TGIK episode on KPack with Cora.
Yeah. That was your first episode that I ever watched.
Oh, nice. And you're like, why do they let that girl do anything? I'm kidding. I'm great. Okay. So we have this one, and then this goes to here. Excellent. And then now we're going to do an image scan.
Yeah. There are a number of tools that you can use here. And the tools that I've used have been closed source. So I believe there's an open source. I believe there's a gripe.
What do y'all in the audience use for image scanning? We have Keith Lee here. Hello. Thought you were early, only to be late. That's okay. It's recorded. Also, it's been really exciting, but I'm glad you're here, and thank you so much for helping to promote it, Keith. And Thindle, always good to see you. I hope you've been having a wonderful day. And Waciuma's thinking right now about a good image scan technology that we can include in our hypothetical supply chain. Yeah, so I guess, are you still researching? Because I can recap for Keith if you want.
At this point, I would, if I were in open source, I would still be using Tecton to run a CLI for a tool like Gripe. And I know that that is an area where we've got some Tanzu application platform magic. Of course, we're here talking about the open source Cartographer project. And so there's a platform built on top of it that has some closed source scanners. So we can, for right now, we can just say Tecton again.
Okay.
And we can say like, hey, there's a place where if you're looking to contribute to the open source community,
maybe a good image scanning. Yeah. We have Alexander says Snike. Do you know that one?
I don't.
I'm unfamiliar.
I want to check it out.
I don't know how effective this is, but you know. And then finally, we're going to create a resource that will deploy.
Yeah. There are, of course, lots of different ways that you can deploy. Let's keep it easy and just say deployment. Okay. The native Kubernetes deployment.
Okay.
You can get fancier when you start talking about cap apps, Knative runtimes, etc. And you would make those choices based on your needs.
And Salaboy put a link up for the snake or whatever that maybe. So this is an open source image scanner, y'all. Is that correct? Image scanning tool.
Yeah. Looking at it, the one thing I was trying to check out is if it is if it's a Kubernetes resource as well, or if it is.
So we have these 5 steps we want our image to take to get to production, and we are able to create resources for each of the 5 steps. But then right now they're completely independent resources. And so how do we chain them together or get them to talk to one another?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the challenge that Cartographer is coming in to help individuals with.
Okay.
The answer is for your let's imagine what you would be doing by hand if you were to do this. First, you would write out your FlexCD object, and that would be some YAML where you're giving it some information about this. You know, it's a source control. It works with source control, and you're going to tell it like, hey, pull down this repo, pull down this branch, and you would apply that to your cluster. You'd submit it to your cluster, and then the object would be created, the control loop would run, and a status would show up on the object. And you could check that status, and it would say, hey, in the cluster, if you hit this address, you'll be able to access the code that currently is represented by the branch that you told me.
So then can I put a controller always has a status?
Yeah, like 99%.
Okay, I won't say always, but you never really should say always in tech or anywhere really. Always, never say always. Yeah.
There you go. I might even say, we might say, actually, let's take a step back. What is a K8s controller? K8s controller interacts with objects. Or,
Okay.
let's see. K8s controller, because you have your controller, and your controller is going to control some objects. And those objects are going to be of some resource types. So you have this, you can almost think of it like when you think of your Java classes and then your instantiations of a class. That resource type is that abstract type.
Okay.
And then the object is a particular object that you've submitted to the cluster. And by and large, you're going to submit an object that has a spec. And that spec is your specification. Like, what are you saying this object should be like? And then when the control loop runs, it's going to add a status where it says, okay, I ran, here's the output.
So is the instance what has the status, or is the controller what has the status? The instance.
The object instance. Each object will have a status appended to it. So when you get the object, you'll see your spec that you've written, and then under the spec, you'll see the status the controller has added.
Okay. And so now how does that relate to our Flux resource on our cluster?
Yeah, so we write some FluxCD status, or sorry, some FluxCD spec that says, hey, go to my GitHub page, go to this project, go to this branch, and FluxCD will take that spec and it will do some work to expose the code, add a URL that's available within the cluster, and it will write that URL into the status. Yeah, and that's its job. It'll keep doing it. When you make a change to your branch, FluxCD its control loop will look and say like, oh, I have an old version of this branch. I'm going to update the code that I'm exposing in the cluster.
So it inputs a get URL and outputs what?
It outputs a URL of code within the cluster. And that is valuable both because it's no longer, that code is no longer on like some particular branch or anything. It's just a directory of the code that was in that external world.
Okay. Local dir. Yeah. Cool. So are we keeping, I'm a little afraid that we're getting a little lost in the details. Do you feel like we're telling the story well right now?
Well, yeah, I think we're okay.
Okay.
So
at a
high level,
Boy put some resources on image scanning into the chat if anyone is interested in. Oh, looks like some open source image scanning resources. Cool. Thank you, Salaboy. Okay. Now what's the next step, please? Okay.
So we've defined our first object. The controller ran on it. It outputted some information to us. So at high level, that's all that's happened. And without Cartographer, what are we going to do? We're manually going to take that directory information and we're going to paste it into our next step, into our Tecton step. There's going to be some information that like already we knew that like, you know, it's like, hey, run some tests, etc. But it wouldn't have known what where to run those tests. And so we say, oh, do it over there. And then from that, when Tecton finishes running, it's going to do its control loop thing. It's going to run our tests. It will tell us, hey, I ran the tests, they're good, and we'll say, oh, great, I'm going to take that same URL that succeeded, and I'm going to stick it into my KPAC image. And then KPAC will run, and it will say, okay, I've created an image for you. I push it up to an image registry, like Docker Hub, and here's the address. And we'll say, oh, cool, great. I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it into my tool for image scanning. And then it'll scan, and when it says, okay, that was good, I'll take that image address that's been verified, and I'll stick it into Kate's deployment.
And then running image. So back to, like, I think what Nick, the first one, said, their experience with an orchestration tool is writing a bunch of bash scripts, or their experience with CI/CD is running a bunch of, like, custom scripts. And so that's what is happening here without Cartographer, is a bunch of scripts. Or I guess there could be two different things, like the scripts versus the orchestration tool.
Yeah, what we just did is we made ourselves the choreographer.
Yeah.
Right? We're the message broker. FlexCD made some change, and then we're like, oh, I see that change. I'm going to go write this down. And so we're software engineers. Why do anything ourselves when we can get code to do it? So instead of being the choreographer ourselves, we're going to talk about how does Cartographer do the work that we just saw.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
So
I already talked about one resource type that we think of in Cartographer. We think of a supply chain. A supply chain defines here's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. The other piece another piece that's super important. There are going to be 3. We've got our supply chain. Another is templates. The third is workload. The templates are objects that are going to wrap the objects that we just saw. So we manually were writing a FlexCD object, and with Cartographer, to save us from that copy and paste that we were doing manually, we're going to wrap that FlexCD object in a Cartographer template object.
Okay, I'm a little behind you.
That's okay.
So you mentioned 3 building blocks that we're going to talk about today for Cartographer: template, supply chain, and workloads, right? I guess that's plural. And so we are going to wrap our resource in a template, you said. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
And so, when we think of, you asked me before, how does having been a 3rd grade teacher affect things? Like, often I try to think it's the dead simplest explanation. So when we think of a template, like, let's go all the way back to when we were kids and we had Mad Libs. And, a Mad Lib, for folks that don't know, you'd have a book and it would say, okay, give me an adjective and a noun, and you would write them all in, and then you would turn the page and there would be a story that would be written, and like most of the story had been written by the book author, but keywords had been filled in by you, filling in that template. So that Mad Lib is a template for a story. In the same way, we're going to write a template for each of these objects, and just like in the Mad Lib.
And these are all Kubernetes native objects, like that, right? Like,
yes.
Okay, cool. Great.
So in our template for our FlexCD source control object, we will have some things that we can write beforehand as authors, and we just say, like, hey, like, here's the story. Here's the stuff that I know is going to be the case for every one of these that I stamp out. And then there will be other pieces that can vary and can accept values from the supply chain that's controlling, that's linking these together.
So the supply chain links all the templates together. So that goes around everything. Is that correct? Okay. And then it's also between the steps. So I need to, the way it looks now. Right. So that's our supply chain. It's everywhere. Okay. Cool.
And then the last piece is the workload. There are going to be some pieces of information that we'll want to provide that won't come from within the supply chain. So
okay.
I guess before we get to the workload, let's just say that we hard code our FlexCD template so that for that first object, there are no varying. There's no variable fields.
Okay.
And we just say, this is a supply chain just for my Waciuma's Hello World application. I'm just going to hard code, like, when you go to source code, just go to my source code and run this. It will, it's going to spin, it's going to do those steps that you already have written out. It's going to take that Git URL that I hard code in there. It's going to output some local directory, and the supply chain is going to be responsible for that copy paste operation that we did before. It's going to take that local directory information from the FlexCD object, and the Tecton, the template wrapping Tecton will say, I want, I need some local directory information. Please put it in this field. Or I want some local directory information, and when you give it to me, I'm going to put it in this field. And the supply chain is responsible for saying, like, here is that information. Like, I have that information from a previous step.
So
so you might even use like a blue arrow to move that local dir from FlexCD to Tecton.
Because the supply chain's the one moving it, but the template's the one asking for a specific piece, right?
Yes, the template says, I need some information from my message broker, from my supply chain. And the supply chain is responsible for providing that information when it gets it. So from FlexCD, it's going to, the template is going to say, hey, I want to output this this piece of my status to the supply chain.
Okay.
And then the supply chain, as the message broker, says, okay, I provide the information that I took from the step, I provide it to some future steps.
Okay, so output success from template to supply chain. Right?
Yeah.
So, oops, I'm so excited, I was throwing it around. Test success. So now this is in the supply chain memory and it can be used anywhere on any of the templates.
Yeah. Just so folks, the Tecton example is a little funny. So why don't we move from the Tecton one to the FlexCD one and say output local dir.
Okay. So the template outputs local dir. And then that goes into the memory of the supply chain. And so now local dir the supply chain can put local dir into any of the other templates, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool.
And when writing the supply chain, it'll be yours. It's the responsibility of the person writing that supply chain to say, which templates am I going to provide this to? So by default, it doesn't provide that message to any template. And then you would just
it's not
say,
like broadcasting
hey,
it to the system. It's just available to those who know to ask for it.
It broadcasts to who you specify to broadcast it to.
Okay,
so
got it.
By default, it's not going to broadcast it to anyone, but when you define that supply chain object, you'll say, like, hey, there's some information from step 1 that I want you to pass to step 2.
Okay. We have a question that I think we're kind of answering in the moment. Babus is asking, where does the message broker fit? I feel like that's kind of what we're like. The supply chain is the message the equivalent of a message broker in this case.
The supply chain is it's defining that broker behavior.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah. If you don't feel like your question is answered, will you ask a more specific one and we'll dig in too, Babusa, please. Thank you. Cool. Okay. So all of these have outputs, and then all of these are asking for inputs, and then the supply chain is choreographing what's happening. And I'm just guessing here, and I'm going to make it a question. I'm imagining that resources can have more than one output and more than one input. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Cartographer, as it's written today, has a very, we're very focused on this use case of the path to prod of creating applications, and so what you can output is defined by the template type that you use. So there are templates that are meant to output the location of source code. There are templates that are meant to output the location of images. There are templates that are meant to output the Kate's configuration. And so all of those are things that we enable, and some of those entail multiple pieces of information. So often when you're defining the location of source code, you would give both a URL as well as a branch or a reference. And so that's 2 pieces of information that are needed for that one template.
Do you want, so I wrote here that templates have different types. Do you want me to go further and maybe write like the type of each template and capture that in our pipeline, or do you think?
Sure. I mean, we can certainly use this example. One thing that let's go back and fix one thing. Fix a mistake that's on here right now.
Okay. Yes, I love that.
So you have in the first box, we output a local dir, and the second box consumes a local dir. In the second box, we output success, but the third box takes in a local dir.
Consumes the local dir. Yeah.
And so that tells us, wait, where'd that local dir come from? Well, what Tekton is doing is it outputs a local dir when there is success.
Okay, so that's the template. Output success. So output local dir, even though this is success, that's not what it's outputting.
Yeah.
I love it. And that's logic that's written into the template. And then similarly, output success here will be an output of an image.
Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. And then
that Kate's, there are just 2 more successes.
Oh,
that want to the Kate's deployment consumes image.
So I want to put a pin in that because we have a couple comments that I want to address, a couple comments and questions. Alexander said pub sub. Do you think it's a publish subscribe model? Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah. Yes, quite so. The message broker is publishing information in a limited fashion. And then, yes, the templates are responsible for I'm trying. Yeah, is it the templates are responsible for requesting specific fields for the information that's been broadcast to them.
Okay.
So at least I would say at least in a hand wavy sense, I wouldn't be shocked if somebody came up to me. They were like, "Waciuma, what are you talking about? That's not pub sub. Pub sub is X." I'd be like, hand wave.
In spirit, we'll say it's pub sub in spirit at least.
Yeah.
And then we have a good question from Murthy. Can there be multiple consumers of an output from a step? How does Cartographer know what consumers it should pass on the information to?
Great question. Yeah.
So my understanding is it passes the information to the supply chain, and then the supply chain, so the template passes the information to the supply chain, and then the supply chain knows which other template or templates to supply that information to. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Excellent. You're teaching well.
So to the first question, can there be multiple consumers of an output? Yes. How would Cartographer know which consumers? That's information that you would write into your supply chain. So you would say, hey, I've got this template that has I've got this step, this resource in my supply chain. Here's the template reference, and so it would go and say like, oh, hey, here's a template. It's templating this FluxCD object, and then the supply chain would say, oh, I've got this next step. It's another resource. Here's a reference to the next template, and then you would also say, here's the previous. I want it to have access to this previous information.
Yeah.
To these previous outputs, like the outputs of. So at step N, you can say, hey, I want this step to have access to information from step C and step D and step M.
So I have a question related to that. Then we talked about a pipeline use case where one is very linear, one leads to another. So it sounds like with this, it's less anything downstream of a value can receive that value. It doesn't have to be the very next resource.
Correct.
Yeah. So we're presenting this in a linear fashion for a story, but it's not as linear as a pipeline, is my understanding. Is that true?
I would say pipelines can have that behavior. A pipeline does not need to. A pipeline can branch as well.
Okay, excellent.
What is really different is that in a pipeline, and I had mentioned this before, you run a pipeline from beginning to end. And in choreography, our primitives, these Kate's controllers, they're in their control loop, right? And so when I give an input to, we've been talking about FluxCD. Let's stick with it for a second, and then we can move to KPAC. When I give FluxCD an input and say, hey, here's the URL of a Git repository, and here's a branch, main. it will get me some output. It'll say, here's a local dir that reflects the source code on main. But then outside of my Kubernetes cluster, I'm going to code away and I'm going to change the state of the world. I'm going to push new code to that branch. Nothing will have changed in the spec of my FluxCD object, right? It's still pointing to the same URL, the same SHA, the same branch, main. But suddenly it's got what used to exist there is different. And so its status will change. That happens without having to kick off, without having had to kick off any previous step. Well, that's a weird example. This is the first step. In the same way, KPAC works. The great thing about KPAC is that it is automatically making your images. And so I mentioned before, like, oh, what if you built with an old image? KPAC's really smart. Cloud native build packs are really great because they can say, scan this code, create the best image that you can from it, but then there can be some updates to base images. They say, hey, we've got the new Ubuntu image. And KPAC can say, oh, I'm looking at the same code. It's the same spec that you gave me before, but now I've got some knowledge of the outside world. There's a better base image out there. And so without making any change to our first step, that FluxCD, without making any change to that second step, our tests, our third step, KPAC, may say, hey, I'm going to kick off a change from right here. And that's that independence that I, as the user, don't need to have any knowledge of those external changes to base images in the world. I depend on that controller to update independently, to run and to output some new status, and any other step that consumes it will kick off from there. So I don't run the whole pipeline again.
You manually don't run anything. It run, it's a living, breathing thing. Yeah. And then it doesn't have to build an image if that piece of it didn't change. Like, it's only affecting resources that should be affected that are changing. When otherwise it sounds like when you're running it more linearly, you have to rebuild everything from scratch every time you run it.
Yeah, you have to have some trigger that's saying, oh, something's changed, re-trigger the whole pipeline. Here the pipeline's just always running.
I love that. We have a lot of great questions and comments in the chat right now. So Abhishek says, sorry, I got lost in between. Does Cartographer do all the steps to production?
So Cartographer is there to enable you to do all the steps to production. Yes. Of course, Cartographer is sitting above all of these controllers that you, when you write your templates, when you write your supply chain, define. So we said, up in that upper left corner, there's steps to production. We said, like, oh, these are the steps to production that we're choosing today. But maybe you work in an organization that wants to add in some extra steps, like some manual review steps or something else. When we say all of these steps to production, you're going to define what are your steps to production.
Excellent. And then how can we pass some parameters from one step to another? So that part is being automated by the interaction between the template and the supply chain. Is that correct?
Yeah. To dig in, do you think we're ready to dig into a little bit about how that's done?
Oh, yes. I have some questions that I feel like will help me fill out this a little more. So do you want, which is basically, I'm learning how something's being pulled in, but I just wanted to somehow capture it going into the next one, being received by the next one. So I wanted to ask about how to draw that. But so it happens automatically, and apparently we can dig into more details, and we will, but we're just going to put a pin in it right now. Does that sound good? Okay. So, and then we have a ton more questions too. Can the technology within the building blocks, is it swappable? So if you want to change your tool, use Kaneko instead of KPack or Argo CD instead of Flux CD. How much work would it be to change one thing in the supply chain?
I love that question because you are hitting on
Me too.
Part of our design goal. Yes, we want it to be super swappable. I talked about how there are template types. So when we say like, hey, we've got this step that's a KPack step, and it's going to output an image, well, it's wrapped in an image template. All you need to do for your supply chain to go from KPack to Kaneko is to write a template, an image template that wraps the Kaneko creation. And then in your supply chain, where you used to be saying, hey, at this step, point to my template that wraps KPack, just switch it and say, oh no, at this step, use the template that points to my Kaneko creation. And things will just run because the supply chain is just expecting the template's going to stamp out an object, it's going to give me back an image declaration, and I, as the broker, am going to pass that forward. So eminently swappable. That is a goal.
So
and the tutorials that we pointed to earlier at cartographer.sh, they talk about how you can swap. I'm trying to think if we do a swap in there or if there's a swap in the examples. I'll tell you what. Definitely check out our tutorials because that is something that we want to make super easy for folks. And so if you read through tutorials and you find like, oh, I'm super confused, like at me.
At you.
Open.
And where should they at you?
Twitter? Any way possible. The easiest.
Kubernetes workspace has a Cartographer
the easiest is
channel.
going to be to open a pull request on the Cartographer project. And just say like, hey, the tutorials didn't show me how to do this, and we as a team will rewrite those. I am my handle is Waciuma, like for Twitter. So eventually I'll log on to Twitter and see a message, but it doesn't happen very often, so it's not the best way to get me.
Excellent. And also in the Kubernetes Slack workspace, there's a Cartographer channel, and that's always a good way to reach out to the community. If not Waciuma specifically, someone there will help you out for sure. So many more great questions are being asked. Oh, I just wanted to point out, you're saying swappable is a goal, but maybe not something that happens 100% yet. When you say that's something we want to do,
that's something that you can do today.
It's done. Okay. Yes, we want to do it, and we also do it.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay, cool. And then do we have some shared global state, by the way, all steps, and how can it be accessed?
Yes. I love these questions because I'm just like, these guys get it. The workload is providing some global state. We haven't talked about it yet.
We haven't.
Do not let us go without talking about it.
Good question. Nice. Okay, we have another one, Nerthy. So in non-technical terms, is Cartographer like a marketplace? Consumers register for some data. When that data is available from a step, it gets sent to Cartographer and sends it to the registered consumers.
I think that's a great description. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's the marketplace, that defines where it's going to go. It's not it's both. The consumer's asking for it and the marketplace is giving them. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that wonderful analogy. Abhishek is asking, would it be right to assume Cartographer is an aggregator?
I don't know that I would call it an aggregator. I mean, it aggregates some information, yes. I tend to think of it kind of in two ways. Either one as a message broker. Another way to think of it is as an operator of operators, or to put it another way, as a controller of controllers. So we have FlexCD, it's a controller. It has some state that is written to it, and it spins and it outputs information. Cartographer is sitting at that higher level, and it's saying, okay, I've got a suite of objects that I'm going to be, I'm going to get some state from a work. I'm going to get some objects submitted, templates, supply chains, workloads, and then based on those, I'm going to spin and create new objects, and those objects will be run by operators. Controllers. The term controller and operator are like really interchangeable in Kubernetes. So if you hear me use one or the other, it's very fine to think of them as synonyms. And so I'm going to define some object, it's going to spin and do some work, and then I'm going to take that and I'm going to define another object, and it's going to spin and do some work. So yeah, I think of those as two really useful analogies to think of what is it that Cartographer is doing at heart.
I liked Cartographer as a controller of controllers. Also, FieldStable has a pass parameters using Windows registry is always the best, and says he's trolling, of course. FieldStable and Thindle, yeah, I appreciate your color commentary always. So we started talking about template types. I'm kind of interested in what the other template types might be, and if you think that is interesting to include.
Yeah, there are only 4. So I mentioned 3 of them, the ones that output some specific information, and the last one is just what I call the bare template that doesn't output any information. So again, the ones that do are source, image, and config.
So this would be a source?
Mm-hmm.
Like what would our specific use case have? So this one would be a source, right? And would this be config? The testing would be a config one?
This one's also source, because it's outputting that same type that it took in. It's outputting that local dir.
Okay. And then this is also a source?
Well, the step before is an image. We output that image address. We scan that image address with that next step. And then when it's good, we output image address.
Right. I'm using 2 different things for the same. And then, so what's the template type?
So you tell the template type by what is it outputting.
So therefore it's an image. Okay, I got it. Sorry about that.
Yeah. No.
And then this is what you called bare or something when it doesn't output anything?
Yeah. So the
B-A-R-E?
types are cluster source template, cluster image template, cluster config template, and then just cluster template. And so it's hard to refer to. We don't really have a canonical name. And
I tend to call it
the bare template, or the template with no output. Yes.
I was thinking of it.
That'd be more fun.
Okay, I just want to get this consistent. Okay, and then I'm interested in FieldStable. Findle was here, said hello earlier, but hasn't been around too much. So they must be choosing gaming over us. I'll try not to cry too hard myself to sleep tonight. So we have the local directory, and I want to capture how the supply chain puts that into the source. So probably just another, and how this template type is asking for an input that the supply chain is supplying.
Yeah. So
maybe it's just like this input ? And then the local dir gets put here or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, here we're getting into things where it's a little hard to show without showing like the actual YAML.
Yeah.
But at a really high level, or without, I'm wondering if maybe we'll need to like erase the orchestration versus choreography soon.
Yeah, we have a lot more to talk about.
Well, if we want to talk about how exactly are they specifying, let me try talking it out, and I will let you.
Okay.
You've got great board management, so I will let you decide how to do it.
And is this back to the question? Are we getting into this now that we said we'd put a pin in? Are we
Yeah.
back around to? Okay, great. Alexander, we didn't forget about you.
Okay. So the at the supply chain level, as I said, we declare, hey, this is a source template, and so the supply chain just inherently knows this template is responsible for passing a URL and a reference to me, and so that's what it's expecting to consume. In terms of how does it know where to pass on? Well, when you define your supply chain in your spec, you're going to list a number of resources. It's what we've been calling our steps. You're going to define each step, and in each step, you're going to have a couple of pieces of information. You're going to say, what are you going to call this step? Two, you're going to say, what's the reference for the proper template? There are, as you can see right now, there are 5 templates at least that we've submitted to our cluster. So we need to say for step 2, which of these templates defines that step? And then you list out what are the inputs? What are the sources or config or images that you want to pass on from previous steps? And so when you say like, let's say for a step 3, when you say what you're going to have to provide a source to it, you can see that it's taking in some local dir. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, is a step a 1-to-1 ratio with an image? Well, it wouldn't be for exporting because you can whatever information you're receiving can go to more than one. But is a step in a supply chain associated with one template?
Yes.
It's a 1-to-1. Okay.
Yeah. So you will. Yeah. So for every step, you're referencing one template, one object that's going to get stamped out, and you are going to provide it an arbitrary number of inputs from previous steps.
So this would be step 1, and this would be step 2, like this. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We can. When we talked before about branching, for the folks that geek out on algorithms and things, supply chain is a directed acyclic graph, and so setting an order to a DAG can be complicated. If it branches out and then it comes back together, and then how do you number it? This is 1, this is 2, this is 3. But yes, they do have an order because it's a directed graph.
Okay.
So yeah, when you write out the definition of step 1, you're going to say, again, here's what the supply chain, I'm going to refer to the step by. Here's the reference to the template that it's going to be stamped out, and here are any of the inputs that need to be created, or sorry, not created. Here are any of the inputs that need to be passed on from previous steps.
Okay, so I think I'm going to have you restate that. So supply chain defines the steps. We're showing the steps in the graph, and then a step involves 3 things is what I'm hearing, right?
Yeah.
The 3 things. So I'll capture that. I think maybe with my space. I'm saving this space to talk about workloads. Does that seem like, and then
that's wise.
Yeah. Okay. So supply chain steps. I'm trying to keep it color coordinated, but the blue doesn't show up that well. So I'm doing it. Supply chain steps. They encompass 3 things. So a reference to a template, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. And then what's another thing?
The name that step will be known by to the supply chain.
Okay. Step name. And then what's the third thing?
Inputs. And those are, yeah. In the YAML, sources are separate from images, which are separate from configs. So, but yeah, we should think of it in general as just one thing. It's a group of inputs.
Okay. All right. Great. I feel like we've captured that. I'm just gonna have to just like, oh, if I spread my legs apart really far, then I'm shorter, you know. I can fit in this space.
It's like
all right, we have some more. Ooh.
It's just like getting into that ready stance for.
Yeah, like a softball. Yeah. Does Cartographer provide a way to watch logs from each step in one place? Like, how do you catch errors? That's a great question.
Yeah, so Cartographer, this is a leveled system. So there are, we've got what's going on at the Cartographer level where we're doing all the stamping of objects. And then there's the controller, for example, the Flexity source controller, where after Cartographer does its work of creating the object the way you've specified, the source controller is going to run and maybe it hits a network error. In that case, Cartographer will surface information like, hey, I was expecting to get some output from the source controller, and I just haven't. And then it will be incumbent upon the operator to dig into that Flexity controller and look at its logs and its status and outputs and figure out what went wrong. So Cartographer is not aggregating logs from the created objects.
But it's an open source project, so if it might happen, right? If that's what the community wants or wants to implement.
Yeah, if quite so. Yeah, we want to make our users happy.
And we have another question. How does step 3 KPAC get past output from step 2 and not step 1, as both of them are outputting local dir? So that is a good, so in the supply chain steps, when you're defining the inputs, the input must be specific to other templates.
To other steps.
It must be happening there, right? To other steps. Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yeah. So you would give, so let's imagine we had step 1, the source, and we call it get source. That's the name that we put. And then we have the second step, and we say test source. And then we have step 3, which is, then we call it build image.
I don't think I'm going to do that here because that's confusing.
I don't know.
We're going to call step 1 get source. And this one we'll call it, what did you call it? Build source?
Test
build
source.
Is here.
Or just source. Test.
Sure, we'll call it test. And we'll call this one build.
Mm-hmm.
And so we name our tests in our supply chain. And then when we get the input, we'll say we want the output from step 2 to be the input to step 3. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
So we'll say in those inputs, we'll say, hey, there's a source input, and this step that you're going to refer to is test step rather than get source step.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Yeah, so that at a really high level, I guess I struggle because I'm like, well, there's always more details that we could share. I think that's sufficient for the supply chain side of providing information from one step to another. The second half of that is, okay, I'm a template and supply chain, I have some information that the supply chain is making available to me as a message broker. How am I going to consume it? Which is something you've been asking, like how does local door get used?
Yeah.
And I go back to that Mad Lib example. Also, if everybody's like, I've never heard of these Mad Libs, like, what are you talking about, Waciuma? Like, please say something.
If you want, I can drop a link in the chat. Yeah, I know what you're talking about, but we're the same age. It seems like similar age. So, yeah, I don't know if the kids these days know about Mad Libs.
Yeah. In the same way, we're writing a template, and so there's going to be a lot that we just write and that we hard code in. And so we'll say, our build template is going to say something like kind image. That API group is going to be kpack.io. I should really know that. That's right off the top of my head, and I just don't. And then there are going to be some fields that can't be hard coded because we don't know them. And so the kpack image has a particular field where it's going to say, like, hey, where my job is to look at source code and create an image. Where is that source code? And so what we'll do in our template is, instead of writing some hard-coded value there, which wouldn't be very useful, it wouldn't be very reusable, instead we'll say consume sources dot here is a test sources dot test dot reference dot URL. Sorry, not reference. What is that saying? Well, it's saying, when we say sources, we're saying, hey, I'm a cartographer template. I know that there is a supply chain, and I know that supply chain can provide me a list of sources. And we just did that, right? We just wrote our supply chain that's going to provide a source to this image. So we say, okay, the value that goes in here, instead of something that I've specified, it's some field that I'm going to ask to be filled from that list of sources. So we say sources dot, and after the dot is whatever name we give that input from the supply chain. And then, as we said, sources can be a URL and a reference. So we say sources dot name dot URL. And that's how the kpack image suddenly knows, like, all right, great, I've got all the pieces of information that I need to fill this piece of the template, and ultimately fill all the variable pieces of your template, and an object gets stamped out.
So the workload is giving the details, like we hard coded the get URL, but we don't want that hard coded. Okay.
Yeah, we are going to come back to the workload. We haven't even touched the workload.
Oh, okay. So Baboose is asking for hands-on steps with code. I'm going to drop that same getting started tutorial that I've been, but there also, if you, what I said, now, hold on, sorry. And so if you, but maybe instead of first supply chain, I'll truncate the end and just get to the whole tutorials page so you can see lots of choices. Would that take them somewhere?
I'm not sure. I have not tried that.
Let's, if I take off the first supply chain end of the URL.
Trying it right now.
Does it take you somewhere good?
It just kind of takes you to the front page of the documentation.
Okay.
We should make a landing page for that.
So here, there is a tutorials. So I'll just drop the same one. So that's a tutorial, a hands-on tutorial for this.
Yeah. Okay. So I talked through that templating, how the templates request information from the supply chain. And it made sense in my head, but I don't know how it made sense. So I'm going to use you as my example. Did that make sense? Could you explain that in your own words if somebody asked you?
So I was, admittedly for that one, I've been with you the whole time, but admittedly for that one, I got kind of into my drawings. But but what I'm understanding is there's a some sort of way within the template that you can say you're looking for a value that can be provided by the supply chain. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and just the same way that you would write a Mad Lib and you would say like, okay, here's all the stuff that gets hard coded, and then here are the fields that I don't know, and then there's a particular syntax for just saying like, okay, in here, I want you to grab the information from the supply chain broker that's being supplied to me. I'm just going to like expect the supply chain is going to provide this information, and surprise, surprise, if you write a supply chain and you don't give it that information, things are going to go badly. Like nothing can get stamped out. So it is important to like provide the information from the supply chain point of view, and the template then consumes that information.
Is there a safeguard if you try to remove a resource that's providing an input to another template that it will warn you? Or change a resource in a way that it's taking away an input value?
Yes. I'm trying, I can't remember off the top of my head what the error would be. Yes, it will certainly warn you. And as I said, I can't remember right off the top of my head what you would see if you were asking for. At the very least, you could say. Yeah, I'm gonna have to just keep my answer at yes, and I wish I could provide like, exactly that info, and I can't at the moment. But I wonder, I might see if I can run some examples in the background while we're talking.
We have another question for you in chat. Are you ready?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, Alexander, do you provide the possibility to define custom templates, for example, for a bash script or template types predefined? And if yes, how do you solve security issues to limit permissions?
Yeah, so there, I think part of the question there is who's the you? So I, as a cartographer developer, or as a maintainer on the Cartographer project, am making this platform that has like some template types. And then there's a persona that I'm supporting, somebody who is going to create a platform with particular templates and particular supply chains that they've written or that they've taken from a catalog of supply chains and templates that they've defined. And so when we talk about security issues about template types, it's totally possible. Like you should be limiting the individuals who can submit templates and submit supply chains onto the cluster to the people whose responsibility it is to do that and who are held accountable for doing that. Okay? So when we talk about security, like the people who have the keys to your castle, the keys to your platform, are the people who are creating and maintaining those templates and those supply chains. And then there should be other people,
and that can
developers.
That can be implemented with role-based access with RBAC rules like that are native to Kubernetes, and that's not specific to Cartographer.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Excellent.
And then there are other personas that you can have where they're developers who you say, I don't trust you to make all of these to like alter the entire platform, but I want you to be able to use, I want you to be able to consume this supply chain to get your code to production. And you would enable them to provide workloads. That piece that we haven't yet talked about is going to be super key. You'll give them the ability to provide workloads, and that gives them, again, the ability to use the supply chain without the ability to alter it. Even though there are individuals in your organization that can alter it.
And then did we answer the part of the question about how you would incorporate a bash script or like a custom?
So yeah, quickly on bash scripts, when I think like, when I look and I say, hey, I've got this, well, yeah, you can see it here on our board. I was like, I really want a Kubernetes controller that does image scanning. That's like the right approach, but I just don't have one at hand right now. And so when that happens, I reach for Tecton. Tecton is great for doing that bash script stuff. And so in that case, I would be, I would still be expecting that the output is going to be one of those types. It's going to be some source or some image address or some K8s configuration that's going to be the output. And I would write a template that has Tecton run the bash script that I want.
So what I'm hearing is Tecton is a technology that will take your bash script and make it into this type of tool that has a declarative interface and can run independently that then you can use in your supply chain.
Yes-ish. Tecton is a tool that allows you to do pipeline sort of orchestration stuff in Kubernetes. And it's actually different enough. We haven't gotten into, and I'll leave it up to you if you want to. It's different enough that there's another object that we use in Cartographer to wrap Tecton, what we call Tecton pipeline runs or Tecton task runs. We call them runnables. And that's because Tecton's so different that it doesn't have that behavior that most other objects in Kubernetes have, where you can just update the spec and it will run in that control loop. Tecton instead define a task and then you create singleton one-off task runs. So you create a task run, and then if you want to run that thing again, you have to create a new object. It's like, that's so different from like the way Kubernetes thinks and works. That we create this runnable that lets you do that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So We have another question, this one from Murti. Is there a standard that is followed for input output between steps? So the output from a step is you choose your template type according to what your output's going to be. And then input is as that happens within your supply chain. So with the whole big thing. And then that's where you can put where all your inputs are. So the short answer is yes. And that's where you find your inputs and your outputs, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Great. And I love when I can answer. That means you've done a really good job teaching.
Like I'll say I'm having a ball, and I think it's in large part to you. So
thanks. I'm having a really fun time too.
One of the things that I'll say is we talked before about an API, and so I think this is a great question, Murthy, where when we start talking about, is there a standard? Yeah, Cartographer is there to provide a really standard API for that communication, and that API is we expect 3 types of things to be passed on, either a reference to source or to an image or some config. And so that standard is you're using one of those 3 types. And when you define from the supply chain side what inputs are going to go in, it's one of those 3 types of inputs. And that's smoothing that out is part of the advantage of using Cartographer, that you get that easy, like, oh, in my template, I'm just going to say, like, on the source template, here's where to find the source and the status, like, bada boom. And the next step can just say, like, oh, thank you. Like, I don't need to know anything about where that was in the object. Like, your template encapsulated that information and just, like, protects me from that. And I just communicate over that API, which is the same idea where, this is all analogous to using microservices. It's the same idea where if you write a program with microservices, at some point in your code, you'll have some function that takes input and produces an output. And when you define an API, nobody needs to know where that function is in your code. They just need to adhere to the communication contract, that standardization. And so Cartographer is providing that standardization across Kubernetes controllers.
Amazing. Okay, so what I want to do we're getting close to the end, but we still have some important things to cover. One is I want to cover workloads. And then I'd like to do, like, if there's room on the board, I would love to make a little list of benefits. I'm going to really just, like, paint myself into the smallest space. But that's where my head's at for what's important to me to cover before we end this. How does that sound to you?
That sounds great. Yeah.
Great. All right. Tell me about a workload.
Yeah.
Or
so,
how about I will recap the thing that's not adding up so far. And that is what we said, we're going to hard code or get URL. And that's a problem. Like, we shouldn't be hard coding anything. So how are we getting our source, our actual application into the supply chain is the problem. I think that I'm hoping that workloads will solve. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So workloads going to solve that problem, and also a super great other problem, which is I want this supply chain to work not just for me, but also for the developer that sits next to me and on the other side of me. I want a system that's going to work across my organization, so that I can have a small team that gets code to production and a big team that writes code to go to production.
So what I'm hearing is, are you saying that this supply chain can work with, like, lots of different applications, not just one application? Oh,
yes.
Nice.
Yeah, that is, yeah, exactly. And the total reason is, when you are writing the next Twitter, you want everybody in your organization to the greatest extent possible, like laser focused on the problems of how do we support users in that micro communication universe. How do we improve our product for our end consumers? And one way to empower that is to protect them from all the complication of getting the code to, the automating the testing, automating the building, etc. That's a really standardized. That's something you can standardize across your organization. And by building a platform with Cartographer, you do exactly that work.
Excellent. We have another question for you. This one's from Alexander. Alexander says, thanks a lot. About the last step, the deploy, by which technology is it implemented and does it support Canary deployments?
Great question. And this goes back to that earlier question of can you swap what technology is in each step? So for right now, what we said is, hey, we're just going to create Kate's deployment and have that applied to the cluster, which is something that you can do.
So could you use a Knative service as your deployments, and then it would support Canary deployments? Yeah.
You could write a Knative. You could also write an Argo CD. When I think like what tool is out there that's really great about deployments in the Kate's ecosystem, Argo is the one that comes to mind for me. And so, yeah, you could totally template out Argo objects.
Cool. All right, these workloads. So they help put the application in, and they could be used for, there could be workloads that associated with many different applications. So a lot of services within our organization can all go through the same supply chain that we've created here today.
Yeah. So in a workload, you're going to specify, you're going to give it some label, and that label is going to match up with your supply chain. Because you could have a couple of different supply chains that work with like different types of applications, or that need to go through different sorts of steps to be deployed.
So it includes a reference to a supply chain.
To be more accurately, the supply chain has a reference to workload types, and it's your responsibility to label your workload with what type it is.
Okay. All right. So our workload includes a type. We'll just put type. Okay. Okay.
And then at a really high level, the other thing the workload encodes is what's the information that only the developer would know.
Is that like ports, environment variables, that sort of thing?
It can be that sort of thing, along with the really obvious one. Like so obvious it does. Like we don't even think about it. Where's the code? That's that Git URL.
That Git URL. Okay.
Yeah. So anything like that, the information that the operators are like, hey, like we'll never, like this information is going to vary from app to app and we'll never know it.
Okay.
Is the information that's meant to be provided by the workload. So that's starts with what's the location of this application code, through things like what are the environment variables that need to be set.
Okay. So info that varies from app to app, i.e. code location, environment variables. Okay, ports. Okay. So I want to put it up here. So we have the workload. is the input basically to our supply chain. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, is it that easy? Are we done with workloads? I thought it was going to be like a thing.
The in terms of the let me say a couple of things about workloads. One, there was a question before: is there universal status, or is there universal information that's available in the supply chain? And any information like that that you would desire would be in the workload. Every template can reference the workload automatically and just say like, hey, I need XYZ information from the workload. And yeah, there's some information types that are hard coded in the workload, and then anything that's not provided. So when you go to the spec of the workload, you'll see like a source field and a that includes like source git. It says URL and reference. It's also possible to just define some arbitrary parameters on the workload that would be available to the templates as well. So there's some things that we expect that you'll need, and we make it possible for you to request things that we have not anticipated yet.
Excellent.
Yeah, and in terms of, when we were talking about the supply chain giving input, there's that two-step of like, okay, the supply chain provides information, and then the template the template consumes it in a particular way. The template consumes workload information the same way. It says, hey, what's the workload? In this field, put the value that you find in workload spec.source.get.url.
Okay. Do you want me to capture that? I'm having trouble thinking of how I would capture that in ours.
No, I mean, I think we're
good. We're good.
Yeah,
cool. We have a question from Murti. Can I override the image label to follow a company standard instead of a SHA that comes out of the box?
I'm not sure, Murti, if you were able to ask that question in a different way. I'm not sure exactly what you mean.
Is there a particular tool you're using to create the image with that label? Yeah, we'll ask maybe a more detailed question, please. And we'll.
Yeah, and I will say that any field that you can change in the spec or in the metadata of your Kubernetes object. So Murthy's talking specifically about KPAC. So questions like that are questions about, now you're asking about that underlying resource, that KPAC resource. So to that question, I would say, if KPAC spec allows you to change it like manually, then you can template it to change automatically based on the previous steps in the supply chain or based on values in the workload. If KPAC, if you've chosen a tool, so if you choose KPAC and then you find like, oh, KPAC doesn't do what I need it to do, Cartographer is not going to be able to like go in and bang up KPAC and change the way it behaves, but we will allow you to swap in some other tool that you've identified that does work the way you want it to.
Or it sounds like from answers from before, there are ways to incorporate a bash script or something if you want to do something super customized, if you wanted to manipulate a resource that way, right?
Yeah, so when we talk about swapping in some other tool, that other tool could be a Tecton pipeline that uses bash scripts or any other way to do what you need to do.
Cool.
Great.
So is it time to recap some of the benefits of Cartographer?
There's one last thing that I just kind of want to re-emphasize because I wouldn't want this to get lost. Right now we have workload pointing in, and we should just always remember that that could be a stack of workloads. And so what we've kind of defined over here, you're such a better diagrammer than I am. I'm like, oh yes, that is exactly how you show a stack of things. I just would have crowded up everything. What we have over on the right is kind of the definition of the blueprint for a supply chain. And it's going to create from that blueprint, it's going to stamp out actual objects that are going to create a supply chain for one workload, for one application. And then when you bring another workload, it will stamp out another set of objects. So 2 workloads, 2 Flex CD source control objects, 2 KPAC image objects. And then you add a third, you have 3, and they're all operating independently. They're passing information along their kind of logical supply chains.
Cool.
So that's how you build for your organization an application platform, a platform that's meant to allow apps to be built for multiple individuals, where they have to do where they only have to submit a simple workload that provides just a few pieces of information that you specify. A great for those, if you've ever run into Heroku or Cloud Foundry, those are application platforms, and they are not built on top of Kubernetes. One of the big advantages of Cartographer is we're K8s native. But we are looking to allow you to create a platform that gives you something akin to just that CF push.
So you want the goal is the developer experience to be very simple. So they are worried about their workload that has to do specifically with their application. They submit their workload to the supply chain, and then magically to them, it is running in production as it should, and they don't need to worry about all the details. And then the supply chain itself is repeatable, so every developer can have that same experience with the same supply chain. So the operators aren't having to maintain a whole different one for every single application in there.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, cool. Awesome. So a list of benefits?
Yeah.
Let's do that.
I would say that that first benefit is what I was just talking about. Enables an app platform that makes it easy for devs to provide minimal information and get tested, hardened code into production.
That sounds like a lot of different points that you're trying to shove into one point. So enables an app platform, developer experience, simple dev experience.
I would say minimal dev knowledge necessary.
I'm going to write simple dev experience. Or I
like it. Yeah.
Simple, dev UX. And then you talked about hardened code. Could you say more about that? Is that,
I mean, that's the sort of stuff that we have up top that maybe we should say it. All apps go through your assurance steps, or all apps it standardizes the path to prod. might be the simplest way to put it. But yeah, the idea is that, as we said, it goes back to that original value proposition. You want people to pay you, and they're going to pay you if your code is safe and it works the way it's supposed to. And you want to standardize the process of just being able to say, like, yep, everything that we delivered to prod is safe, everything is tested, and this platform, you with Cartographer, you build a platform that does all of that.
Then I think decoupled steps or swappable steps, those might be two different things or the same thing? Two different things?
Yeah, so I think the swappable steps is really valuable. I mentioned that Cloud Foundry gave you the ability to write your code and then just use a command like cf push, and it would just spin and it would give you an output. And if you liked the way that Cloud Foundry worked, it was great for you. But if you wanted to change something, it was not great. And so Cartographer, we could right now go to that step that says kpack and just erase kpack and write Canico, and it's possible to change that. So that swappable steps means that your app platform is highly customizable for your use cases.
And it means you're not locked into a certain technology or vendor, which is always nice too.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to capture is that there's not like a running of the pipeline. It's more like everything's like living and breathing control loop. So it's a reactive process. It's a reactive.
Yes, that's a great point. And I'm sure that there's like some great like a verb that captures it exactly.
Reactive seems like the verb that does it not? It's reactive. I'm doing
sure. People are listening to us talk, so they will get what we mean.
Yeah. So if things change, it's going to pick up those changes. You don't have to go in and tell Cartographer that things have changed, and that's and declarative.
I think that yes, that it might even say it. Yeah, I would say declarative is a benefit that you get kind of just out of the box using Kate's objects. And the part of my goal, I think I've expressed this a couple of times, part of my goal is to use declarative tools that don't require me to get into the weeds, that rather than you totally could choose to write your own Docker files and to use those in your image building step. But I think the best uses of Cartographer are uses that minimize the surface area that you're interacting with. So where you're minimizing that imperative code that you write.
Do you think decoupled needs to be in there? Decoupled steps?
I would say rather than decouple, like you build a system that is decoupled. Your app platform is a set of decoupled steps, and then Cartographer is bringing the advantage of that standard API between your steps. So maybe even decoupled steps connected through a simplified API. Or maybe just a couple steps. I don't want to just
I just yeah, or this API could be separate.
We're just looking and we're like, there's not a lot of space for Waciuma. Simplify your wording.
I can yeah. So yeah, the standardized API and decoupled steps will count as two different things, right? Standard. And then now, okay. And is there anything else? I can put it over here. We have a little room here, so And also in chat, if you have any final questions or comments as we're wrapping up, I'm finding that when I say goodbye, there's a lot of lag in between when, yeah. So if any final questions or comments, please speak up. You all have been wonderful today, by the way. It's been really fun to interact with you, and you've asked such wonderful questions. It's been great. Thank you. Thank you for your time and your mind and your energy. It's valuable. And then Waciuma, do you feel like we did it? Feel like this is
I think
done?
so. Yeah. Part of me is like, oh, like I think I need to go back and be like, I need to have a card in my pocket that I carry around. It's like, no, here are all the benefits. I don't have that card right now, but I think I pulled out a great list and generated it when I would not necessarily have been able to.
Oh, well, that's yeah. My friends say that's my superpower, is making complex things and just getting down to like, what is that, the crux of it? Like, just tell me the basic thing. Don't yeah. So I think that's all, everyone. We got some thank yous in the chats. Thank you for your wonderful questions and your participation. I appreciate you, everyone, so much. If you want to get involved or learn more, I think the very best place to go is to the Kubernetes Slack workspace, to the Cartographer channel. Cartographer.sh is the website. Cartographer has a Twitter handle. Don't contact Waciuma on Twitter. That's what I learned. And he might check it in 4 years. You might hear back from him. Yeah.
I am on the Kubernetes Slack, and I am Waciuma Wanjohi on there. So
okay, great. Easy. And I will be gone next week for DevOps UK. I'm presenting there, and then a KubeCon I'm presenting there too. So the next episode is a Monday episode on May 23rd. Yeah, we're gonna do what is observability. So that'll be super fun. As always, I thank you, everyone. I appreciate you. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you, Whitney. Thanks, guys.